Hello, and welcome to today's ACMP member webinar. Our topic today is Getting Ahead of Digitization, Challenges and Opportunities for Change and Adoption, presented by Selina Thompson. My name is Michelle Levy, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, I would like to share some information on our latest happenings at ACMP. We are pleased to share that Change Chicago will be held in May 2025, and registration will actually open today. So check your email later today to take advantage of early registration rates. The Certified Change Management Professional, CCMP, is a globally recognized credential established by ACMP. It is a good way for practitioners to prove their expertise and knowledge, invest in their ongoing professional development, show commitment to their ethical and professional requirements, and successfully apply change management's best practices. In summary, it advances your professional credibility in this field. It expands credibility internally and externally, assists in competitive recruitment and retention, helps standardize practices used by staff for internal projects and work, and improves the overall effectiveness and consistency of the organization. One of the most valued member benefits that we have is our ACMP resource library, where you can access 10 years worth of member-only tools, webinars, conference presentations, and white papers. The resource library is consistently ranked as one of our top member benefits, so we hope that you will take advantage of it. Our next webinar will be held on December 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. The topic is the disappearing employee loyalty in the age of the gig economy. Be sure to register at the event calendar at acmpglobal.org and discover other educational opportunities that might interest you. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. First, all audio lines have been muted. Today's webinar will run until 1 p.m. Eastern Time. If you have any questions during the presentation, post it in the Q&A, post it in the chat, and I just sent a note to everybody so that you can see where to post them. And if you have any questions during the presentation, the presenter will be answering questions throughout the presentation and at the end. So be sure to join the conversation and prompts from the speaker in chat. And now, I would like to introduce today's presenter. Selina Thompson is an entrepreneur with a passion for people, technology, and change. She inspires people across global countries and cultures to change how they do things for the better by adopting a digital mindset. Since the early 90s, Selina's introduced over 50 million people to digital technologies, including cloud collaboration, the Internet of Things, digital payment platforms, artificial intelligence, and automated service solutions. Selina has delivered change and adoption for the digital transformation journeys of several leading organizations, including Visa, Amex, Royal Dutch Shell, Nissan, and the medical insurance provider BUPA. Recognizing the gap between ever-changing technology and digital adoption, Selina recently founded Forward Transformation with the mission to deliver change journeys that excite and empower people to benefit from technology at pace and thrive in the digital age. Selina, we're looking forward to your presentation today, and I will pass it over to you to begin.
Thank you, Michelle. Thanks for the introduction and the warm welcome. Hello to everyone joining in today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. As mentioned, I'm Selina, and I will be taking you through today's topic, which is getting ahead of digitalization. This is a good opportunity for us as change managers, as we're coming to the end of 2024, to take a step back, reflect on where we are in the digital landscape with digital transformation and how that has impacted and continues to impact the people that we facilitate change for. So I'm just going to start sharing my presentation. Okay. So before I dive into the agenda and how we're going to be spending our time together, I just want to start with a quick reflection moment. And that is looking at the logos that you see on the screen here. Now, these are all famous brands of the past. Some are still with us, but I just wondered if you could have a quick think about what they all have in common. You don't have to put the answer in the chat, but just have a quick reflection for about 10 seconds, and then I will discuss why I've asked you to reflect. Okay, thank you. So the reason why I wanted us to start here is because all of these brands from the past, they all were impacted by the digital advancements. They were unable to keep up with technology and how that was revolutionizing their industries. And unfortunately, many of these brands ended up ceasing trading and no longer exist. If we look at Blockbuster, for example, I'm sure many of us enjoyed watching movies and hiring movies from Blockbuster. And now, of course, we have Netflix and lots of streaming channels. Another example that you'll see here is Kodak and Polaroid, where before we would have our camera and we would print out our films. Now, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, we are able to take our pictures on our phones and other devices, and many of us no longer print. So I think this is a good place for us to start because this is what is driving the urgency for digital transformation today, that need for organizations to stay ahead and for their people as well to keep ahead and help them to stay competitive. So on that point, what will you be learning with me today? I'm going to have this discussion in two parts. The first part, we're going to look at the digital landscape today. We're going to have a quick recap on where we are since the pandemic, which accelerated digital transformation, and look at what the current organizational motivations are for this and why there's an urgency. And then we're going to transition into part two, and that's where we're going to spend most of our time really reflecting on how we can continue to drive a people-first agenda in digital transformation, looking at the opportunities, the challenges, the impacts that we face as change managers, and how perhaps we can better facilitate going forward because there is no sign of slowing down. And then there will be time at the end for closing remarks and a summary. Now, throughout the discussion, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So even though you can't come off mute, do feel free to put your questions in the chat. And then Michelle will help me at certain times to answer those, to read out the questions, and I will do my best to answer the questions during the time. Just a quick recap, learning objectives. So as I mentioned, really want to help us understand what the key drivers and the emerging themes are for digital transformation today, to identify the challenges and the opportunities, and to look at effective change and adoption strategies. Okay, so part one, the digital imperative. This is basically the need for organizations to drive digital transformation. It is no longer an option, as we know. It is now very firm in the strategy for organizations, and it is a critical need. Because of this, digital transformation, as I mentioned, has accelerated tenfold. It started off with, well, it started before the pandemic, and then during the pandemic, we saw a rapid shift. And that was mainly to help digitize the ways of working and the processes so that people could manage their work remotely. But now we're seeing, as time has moved on and more technologies are now in place, the spend for digital transformation is eye-watering, But at the same time, there are many benefits for organizations if they do spend the time and investment. And so what I have here is some statistics just to show you really where we are at today in this space. So research shows that 97% of organizations now have digital transformation as part of their strategy post-pandemic. So that's pretty much nearly everybody. 74% of organizations have prioritized this. And in turn, 26% of companies have proven to be more profitable as a result of prioritizing digital transformation. And as I mentioned, the spend continues to grow, and it's estimated at nearly $4 trillion of global digital transformation investment by 2027, and it will continue. So, what are the organizational motivations? It's no longer all about technology. I think before 5-10 years ago, of course, systems, legacy systems, that seemed to be the driver. How can we do things with technology? Now, technology is fueling organizations being able to remain competitive, relevant, and resilient today. What I have here is the top organizational motivations just to quickly run through. As I mentioned, competitive advantage. So in order for organizations to remain competitive, they are now heavily having to rely on AI to be able to understand data and to be able to streamline operations. Customer expectations. As we all know, as consumers, we have so many products and services at our fingertips. So the fight to keep us engaged and have our loyalty is a very hard battle. And so that is where technology is fueling then. How can organizations better understand us, understand our habits and our needs? And with that, of course, then there is the war on talent. Attracting and retaining talent remains a top priority. And that means having modern workplaces, modern tooling, and being able to make lives easier for your top talent in organizations. Operational efficiency and sustainability. Organizations are looking to cut costs all the time, especially now with the cost of inflation and the economic climate. So using technology and digital transformation is another key motivator to see how organizations can be more productive, cut costs, and also be more sustainable in the future. And finally, the other motivation is agility and resilience. Organizations need to remain adaptable, and they need to be able to stay resilient against any economic threats. And again, having technology to streamline your operations and being able to have the right talent in the right place is also important in today's organizations. So where are we now with technology? I mentioned that things have moved on quite a bit in terms of where the focus is with technology. It's no longer about focusing just on being remote. Organizations are looking at how they can be inclusive and adaptable environments as they're bringing people along the journey. We know that 2024, I'm sure it's not gone unnoticed, that generative AI is key, for example. We've seen generative AI being adopted in the workplace in many sectors and also in our daily lives as well. And that will continue going forward. Being able to have augmented development, so things like virtual reality, for example, is coming more into play as we try to understand different scenarios and user customer experiences. Data-driven decision making. So as I mentioned, having more access to data, being able to analyze the data is key because that is what gives organizations the insights and help them to plan for the future. Sustainability and human-centric technology. So how can technology solve some of the world's biggest problems? If you think of medicine, science as well, these are all key areas where organizations are focusing their technology efforts. So digital transformation has accelerated. It's going at full pace. There is an urgency, as I mentioned. But one thing I always wonder is how ready are organizations actually? It's one thing to have an urgency for the technology, but it's another to have urgency for our people. So you should see now a poll question that's popped up on your screen. Really appreciate if you could just answer, how prepared do you believe the organizations that you work with, whether that's someone that you work for or a client, how prepared do you believe they are to embrace digital adoption? Now, just give a minute for this one.
Selena, this is a great question because we know that change is here, and the question is our workforce really prepared? So I'm going to be interested to also see the poll results with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I am really interested. Okay, I think, Michelle, have most people answered? I can't see from here.
All right, we have some great
Wow.
results. Can you see them, Selena?
I can now, thank you. Okay, so just taking a quick second, and the clear winner, which is what I feel, is that organizations are somewhat prepared. Although interesting to see that 22% feel that their organizations are well prepared. So we can look through, as we look through some of the tactics that organizations can take, we can see whether any of these resonate with the ones that said well prepared. But the reason I wanted to ask this question and just do a bit of a temperature check with you all is because with digital transformation moving at pace, it does feel that organizations are getting left behind. And the focus on having people first in the implementation and in the process continues to be a challenge. So thank you for taking part in that poll. Okay, so moving on to part 2, and this is where we're going to look at the human side of digital transformation. So what I term human-centric digital transformation, it's a term that some consultancy firms use, other organizations use. It's basically where you take a human-centric approach. It's about putting people at the center of the design, the development, and the implementation of technology. Because when you do that, and you look to the right here, you truly focus on the needs, behaviors, and preferences. And that is what arrives at true benefits for the users that are using the technology. A lot of the time, technology software is purchased because it's going to solve a problem, whether that's time, productivity, road blockers in terms of being able to do more. But the question remains, how is this truly benefiting the end users and the people that are on the receiving end? So why take a human-centric approach? Well, research found that when organizations take a human-centric approach, they are 2.7 times more successful than the ones who don't. And what this means is that they have chosen to focus on empathy and understanding of the emotional and psychological impact of digital transformation on their end users. Now, this is important because having empathy and understanding of these points helps us to understand going forward lessons learned and how we can do things differently. Before, there was an assumption that if we rolled out the technology, people would just take it and adapt to it. But we are seeing cases where people have things like digital overwhelm. So they're overloaded by all the tools that they are receiving, a lot of notifications as well, always being switched on. It can be very overwhelming if you've not had time to perhaps attend training or had time to get used to it. So there can be quite big psychological impacts as well through doing digital transformation. And so this is where it is important to adopt this approach. And as I say here, 2.7 times more successful when you do. But this is easier said than done, as I'm sure you're all thinking. Impacts to human-centric digital transformation. I put 4 of the top ones here to share with you, and I'd like to just go through those with you. Okay, so the first one, resistance to change. This is nothing new. As change managers, we know there's always going to be a resistance to change. But what we're seeing here as we are now further forward with digital transformation is that the resistance to change tends to be around fatigue and overload and a lack of trust. So the fatigue comes because people are tired of having to go through so much change. Typically, there are multiple digital transformation projects going on or digital initiatives, and the sheer overload of different projects happening is causing people to have change fatigue. Overload, as I mentioned, and a lack of trust. Now, with this, the lack of trust comes because with having things like artificial intelligence, for example, what are the security protocols? What is happening with data privacy? Employees are more savvy, they're questioning more. It's definitely in the climate, at least here in Europe, as to how companies and organizations are processing employee data in all of these systems. Also, people do fear for their jobs. Automation, even though it has its benefits, does still continue to evoke concerns around, am I going to be replaced? So these are some of the resistances that we're seeing in this space. Breakdowns in communication, again, with a plethora of different digital initiatives taking place, that inevitably leads to breakdowns in communication and causing confusion. So, for example, you may have been told, hey, you need to have this new tool to do your work, and then in 6 months' time, there's another tool or there's another new technology that you need to get used to. And also being able to try and keep up. If you're on a global program, trying to make sure that the messages are consistent and get through to everybody at the right times continues to be a difficult process in terms of being able to improve the digital transformation experience. 3 is the skills gap. So we know that we want our end users, we want employees to be fully trained and prepared to be able to use the new technologies. But what we're seeing is that because of the speed of implementing digital transformation, then there is just a huge skills gap in the marketplace for this. And this is hindering technology adoption. If you don't have enough skilled workers to be able to train other people that might not have these skills, that is one of the impacts. Also, if you don't allow enough time for people to gain these skills, then you will continue to have a wider gap. And number 4 is the lack of psychological safety. So again, as change managers, we are aware of this, that psychological safety is very important. It's particularly key when we look at technology because we need employees to feel safe, to be able to use the new technologies, to be able to have time to play and experiment and not feel that if it's a failure or if it hasn't gone well, that there will be consequences. The good old days of having a waterfall approach, taking your time and making sure everything's perfect just doesn't exist anymore. But how can organizations shift from this mindset and foster more psychological safety? And this is stifling innovation. So with that, just going to get you to participate again if you can. It would be good to hear from you based on what I've just shared there in terms of the impacts to being able to have a human-centric digital transformation. What are your observations? Quite keen to hear what you believe are the blockers or the challenges to being able to implement this. So if you could just pop any thoughts in the chat, and also Michelle, if there's any questions in there, I'm also happy to take them as well.
Mhm. And Selina, while people are adding their information to the chat, there was a question of, are there certain types of digital transformations that are more challenging? For instance, the ones that have a great deal of speed or the size of the change or just the type? If you could answer that, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. So the way I always look at it, you can have a small transformation, for example, it might be a software, a tool, and maybe only 10 or 20 of you need to do that. But if you're doing a very big enterprise-wide, an ERP, a SAP implementation, so I just came off doing a big Workday HR transformation, for example, and that was a global transformation that impacted tens of thousands of employees. Even though it was a solution, a reputable solution, I think we'd given everyone perhaps a year to get to grips with everything. It was still very complicated to do because you had to not only implement the technology, migrate the data, turn off certain systems, integrate new systems. You also needed to sync with certain timings for when employees do their tasks or carry out their activities. So there was lots of aspects that we had to take into account when rolling out a large scale digital transformation versus a small one that might just be a software upgrade, for example. And I think typically in terms of technologies that are harder more than others, a lot of talk about artificial intelligence, but it tends to be more around machine learning. So anything where you're asking the system to mirror a behavior, perhaps the way a worker does a task, for example, with robotics, or perhaps the way a customer uses a particular tool, that does take a significantly long time because you have to look at the data, analyze the data, and train the model on what to do. But it really varies organization to organization. So I hope that answered the question, Michelle.
That did. Douglas Flory brought a great comment up, and it talks about there's 5 generations in the workplace today. Encapsulating their unique concerns and behaviors can be very important. Selina, could you just make a comment or two on that and how you've been effective in approaching that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is definitely coming more into play that we're having different generations in the workplace. And there's an assumption that Gen Z, for example, so our youngest workforce in the workplace, is much more savvy and able to adapt. But at least in my experience, that's not necessarily the case. I think the challenge continues to be is whether you are new and considered tech savvy or versus whether you're a more tenured worker who's been in an organization for 20 years, for example, there's still a need to be able to give everybody the time to truly understand the technology that they're being asked to use, understand why, how it's going to benefit them, and give them the time to practice and use it. So even though there's an assumption that different generations perhaps adapt differently, so perhaps they're, like I say, more tenured employee perhaps is going to be slower, a later adopter. At least from what I've seen, that's not the case. It can be any age range, any generation. And so that's where really having personalized and tailored strategies for the different groups rather than the age, at least I think makes more sense.
Another question, and this is a very important one that I know several people have been challenged with, is
Mm.
the prioritizations that happen where Divya said sponsors and leaders may prioritize digital change, but from their compensation and the way that they are managing, they're prioritizing the tech over the people. And so again, I'm sure you've run into that too. And if you could provide some insights on how do we, as change managers, help provide our expertise and leadership in helping guide organizational changes.
No, it's great. And it's actually going to come up in the next section. I'm going to talk about leadership.
So we have something to look forward to,
And
Selina.
the role, yeah, and the role of leadership, because it continues to be a challenge. Everything from I'm the sponsor, but then they're not very visible, to yes, we're championing the change, but really they're championing the time that they want to implement the technology. So we are going to cover that as well.
And there's a lot of great comments with saturation, prioritization, and the employees' concerns about job security and the impacts of AI on our ability to do our work or being able to have job security. So I didn't know if you'd like to cover more or would like to go to the next section now.
Yeah, it's probably a good segue actually for us to go into the next section, if that's okay. And of course, if there's any comments or questions that wasn't covered yet, then we can always go back over as well. So I will do that. Okay, so as I say, I'm going to deep dive. I'm going to deep dive into each of these areas that I think will cover some of the comments and the questions that you guys have raised. So thank you for your engagement so far. As much as they're the impacts, and that's what we just talked about, there are opportunities for us as change managers. Again, I've selected four just to keep the conversation concise in the time. But the first one is looking at the change plan. We all have a change plan that we're asked to produce or look at. And I think that there are some key components of that change plan that at least I feel are being overlooked and we do need to bring back to the agenda in order to make this successful. So I'm going to cover that. I won't talk into it now. Data-driven success. So I mentioned that there is so much data now that is available to us, and even though employees have concerns, this is an opportunity, I think, for us as change managers to really be able to delve into the data and look at how employees are adopting the technology, or where we can at least facilitate in driving that. Of course, all of this is not possible. So someone mentioned their digital change. There's actually a bigger piece that needs to happen, and that's fostering a digital culture. If you don't have an organization with the right mindset and the right behaviors, then every digital effort that is being put in place simply won't land as intended. And then the other one is the new mandate for change champions. Change champions, they have different names, I know, on different projects. I'm using change champions here for the sake of this discussion. But I think we are seeing that what the ask is of a change champion is definitely changing and evolving because of the requirements of digital transformation today. So let me expand a bit further on each one. So the key components of the digital transformation plan. No surprises here. But as I say, I think with the timescales that everyone is being given to roll out the technology, then a lot of the time, at least from what I've seen, it's difficult to understand at the beginning what is that clear future state and what are the benefits that are expected? What are the tangible benefits? And the reason why I think this is important, starting here on the left, is because this is what drives how we are going to plan the change or even assess what the changes and the impacts. Really being able to understand what is that future state and how does it benefit everybody. So not just benefiting the IT department or certain parts of the organization, but every end user that's been asked to come on board on this journey. And this is where having that clearly defined future state also then makes leaders accountable as well. And I'm going to cover that a little bit later on. People, scope, and timeline. Again, you may get a list of employees that are impacted. You may just get departments. It depends on how granular the data is that you're able to access. But it is really useful to spend the time and actually build personas. And this is something that I started doing some years ago. So actually building the profile of the impacted employee. What do they do? Are there any commonalities with any other roles in the organization? How do they all work together? What are their needs? How will they benefit? By spending the time building up a profile and a persona, you're able to then have a much more realistic timeline and look at what the readiness activities need to be. Again, I put here timeline because, as I keep mentioning, like a broken record, we have very fast timelines, but I think it's important to be able to draw the timeline for people as well as the timeline to implement the technology. So by really understanding the personas of who's impacted, you can better plan them for how much time they need to get ready, and then really be able to have those difficult conversations or even just bring this to light with leaders as well. And having a clear overview with your future state, what you're trying to achieve, and who truly is impacted and how much time they need, you can better plan then for the change roles and responsibilities. So it does vary in terms of who needs to own the responsibilities in this space. Sometimes it's just the change team or one change manager. Sometimes it's the project team. But what we're seeing more now is because digital transformation is impacting every area of the business, then actually the roles and responsibilities for the change could literally be everybody if you think about it. And so, how do we then, as change managers, plan for that and start to negotiate those conversations so that the effort isn't just happening, oh, it's over there in that part of the organization, or it's only those people that are leading it. No, everybody has to be involved and being held accountable. And then the other part of the change plan that I think also tends to get overlooked is securing the resources. So where someone asked just now in terms of, how big is the effort, what types of technologies, you think of something like generative AI, where you're producing a lot of content, or maybe perhaps you're in organizations where generative AI is not allowed yet because of security protocols and data privacy. You need to make sure you have enough resources in place to be able to plan and mitigate for the new technologies that are coming in place, whether that's being able to story tell, give people time to play and experiment, being able to be part of the project team. All those resources need to be accounted for. And the reason why I put this here is because I often see that the resources is underestimated, how many resources we need and how much effort is going to be needed to drive the change. And then with that, being able to plan the mitigation as well. So if you spend the time upfront looking at the resources and assessing the risks, you're then better able to adapt and have a mitigation plan for this as you're going along. I should add that there is some conversation about the fact that the way we do our change plans has changed now. You can no longer have a big, wieldy, year-long plan. It's better to have, iterative stages, sprints, and cycles, and all that is true. But I do think there's still some fundamentals that you can plan up front that will then make those cycles a lot easier going forward. So I appreciate that planning can mean different things to different people, but these are the four components of the change plan, at least, that I think we need to bring back into focus to make this successful with a human-centric approach. Moving on to the next one. So I mentioned data-driven success. What's quite interesting is that when you're looking at digital adoption for customers, so much effort is put into looking at the data because customers equal money. When it comes to looking at user behavior and adoption for internal employees, not so much. And again, there's been studies that found that this is coming more into place. So the digital adoption provider WalkMe, for example, they interviewed different IT leaders globally. I think it was around 200 leaders, and they found that at least 60% are now bringing digital adoption KPIs more into the focus as they're measuring what is considered success. So I think we also have an opportunity as change managers, as we're building our plans and discussing where we want to focus our efforts, being able to facilitate having some clearly defined KPIs. What does success look like? And at what specific times of the plan as well are we going to be measuring for success? A lot of the time, digital KPIs tend to be more around revenue and money and productivity. But if employees haven't had time yet to adopt the technology, then perhaps some of the KPIs need to be slightly different. And on the next slide, I'm going to show you some examples of that. But really, the point here is that it's important to establish the goals early on. Identify your data sources. A lot of the software and the cloud platforms do have dashboards that will show you user behavior. And so if you're able to do this with obviously the permission of the legal team and the HR team in terms of what you can access, and your IT teams as well, of what permissions we can have as change managers, if you are able to access some of these data sources of what's been rolled out, it's really useful then to be able to see, okay, this is where some of the pain points are. So for example, in the past, if I've been able to look in the dashboards, I can see how much time perhaps certain employees are spending, or whether they have actually even gone into the system and carried out some of the tasks that they were trained to do. So it's quite useful. And again, obviously, parameters of privacy, but these are all at our disposal. Once you have your goals and you have your data sources, then tracking and reporting. So this will be able to help us to have more frequent tracking and reporting, not just after training, not just after comms has gone out, but even past the launch. If you're doing continuous improvements as well, then you have this system in place to be able to do that and to be able to continue to identify the trouble spots and to make adjustments where needed. So with that, I've just put here a few examples of KPIs that you can use for that. Quantitative adoption rate. So again, how many people have actually gone into the system and are using this on an active basis? It can vary depending on when you need to use the system. So it may be someone only needs to go in once a year. It may be somebody goes and uses the technology every day. But how successful has that adoption been? Active users, daily, weekly, monthly. Again, this is all at your disposal in terms of how active people are. Onboarding. So again, you're preparing people to use the tool, but how many people actually completed the onboarded effort, completed the training, completed the engagement, raised any concerns or feedback? These are all useful to know. Features, if perhaps you're a little further along in your digital transformation, maybe there's new features that are being rolled out there. How are many people are actually using them and finding them beneficial? And help content. So some platforms, I know ServiceNow does it, Workday, there's lots of other tools which have little help functions. Maybe it's a little assistant, little robot that will guide you. How much of that help content is being consumed? Knowledge articles, for example, they're also very good insights into how your digital transformation efforts are going. And on the qualitative side, it's definitely worth, again, it's more effort, it's more resources, but if we plan for this, being able to go back and have that feedback loop through surveys or analysing people's behaviours, even just watching how people use the technology, looking at customer support, so your IT service desks or whatever the customer support might be called in the organizations that you work with, looking at the types of tickets that they're getting, the comments that they're getting, can be very useful. I was listening to a case study the other day from Chewy, for example, where they found that once they implemented more remote help support with an assistant, for example, that the number of tickets significantly reduced into the IT service desk, for example. So, and that was because they took the time to analyze the data and the types of help queries that were coming in. And then focus groups. So all the people that have shown enthusiasm are involved, continue to work with them as you're going through this process and even beyond, because they can also give you insights, again, psychologically safe space to be able to do that. Okay. Fostering a digital culture. So this is where we're going to come to now a bit more on leadership, which I think someone mentioned earlier. So digital culture is, as I mentioned, important. It's key. It can't be overlooked. You can do all the efforts in isolation, but you need everybody to be on the same page, and that is very difficult. So starting with the leadership, we know that we need them to champion the vision and the change in desired behaviour. So hopefully I'm not teaching you to suck eggs. But what sometimes happens is that it's not relentless. Employees need to continue to keep hearing the why, not just hearing the why at the start of the digital transformation effort or hear the why halfway through and at the end. They need to hear it continuously. Why do they need to hear it continuously? Because it helps them to continue to understand why their work is changing, why spend might have shifted from some parts of the organization into others when we're looking at spend on technology. And leaders are really the people they are really the only people that can lead that effort, and champion the desired behaviors. So again, I think this is an opportunity for us to be able to really sit down with, and this is all leaders. I took out all off the slide, but not just your C-suite, not just your CEO, every line manager who has an influence over their staff, making sure that they are able to tell the story, they understand how the why resonates with them and how it's going to be able to help them and their teams move forward and become high performing teams is really important. The second thing I've got here is your agile practices. So, because of the speed at which things are happening, but also just because it makes more sense now, and having those agile practices, having incremental progress is better than no progress. And you will find that there's some employees who are stagnant because they're waiting to see the end result or the perfect result. But getting them in the habit of, okay, we're going to plan, whether that's communicating, storytelling, whether that's learning, trialing, getting a feel and a look for the technology in small stages will help, and having effective collaboration, which is what Agile is all about. So having those cross-functional teams, and being able to reach everybody as well. So it is still continues to be difficult with frontline teams versus corporate employees. But we are seeing now more communication tools being offered to frontline staff, for example, if that's in stores, out on the road, sales teams, for example. There are a lot more tools, communication tools and technology available to be able to keep sending the messages and the reminders and the announcements out to people and help them to continue to be learning about this and feel connected. So that's at least where we see the role of leadership now, to say, so no longer just being sponsors, but really continually championing the change. Moving down then onto the second half of the slide, which is continuous learning and safe experimentation. So I mentioned that there is a skills gap. One thing that I have started doing more now on assignments is really trying to work more closely with the learning and development team, and looking at this as a more holistic approach. When we look at digital upskilling, we're not just talking about at that moment in time for that particular tool that's been rolled out, but what is that holistic development program, whether that's a leadership development program or an employee program? How is digital transformation being included in the learning and development efforts? And where can some of the trainings that are in place, whether that's from technology providers, or maybe that's even just behaviors like having a growth mindset, be more adaptable, be more agile, how can some of these elements be brought into the learning and development programs? This, I think, makes our life a lot easier as change managers, because again, we're not having to plan in isolation. And it also helps to make learning and development teams more accountable for bringing this as a continuous learning exercise. That also helps us then to tailor the training, and especially looking at digital natives. So back to the discussion around different generations in the workplace. If you, instead of planning for the age, but just plan for the fact that some people will be digital natives and people that are beginners to using technology, and some people will be very advanced, really helps to make sure that the effort is balanced and useful at the right times. A one size fits all doesn't help. Just because of time, I'm going to move on quickly to the last one, which is the role of change champions. So still needed, we still need to have people on the ground explaining what is happening and rallying the troops. But what we're seeing here now is that where before they were, the early adopters, the department representatives, they were able to be SMEs, technical guides, and included in the participation. The role is now requiring more of a strategic approach. And so again, this is where leadership needs to be more involved. The more leaders that you have as your change champions that are able to explain how digital transformation is impacting their strategy, the better for the organization. With that, then having cross-functional collaborators, what we are seeing now is that the same problems that are being solved in one area of the organization with a particular technology can also be solved in another organization. So, for example, I worked with a client where the problem that was being solved for the finance team was also a problem that could be solved for HR and marketing. And because I set up having cross-functional collaborators whereby the different change champions got together, discussed what their pain points were, and looked at how the technology that was being implemented could help them, they realized that there was lots of commonalities as well. So moving away from a siloed approach. Being empathetic, as I mentioned, and then measuring value. So this is another area that's coming up more now is value-driven outcomes. And change champions can be key to that because they can continue to question how the technology is adding value in terms of delivery and efficiency to the roles. And is there anything else that the technology can be doing? So having a more value-driven approach. So the focus areas for change champions, digital adoption, digital culture, championing obviously the people element and measuring and communicating value. And I appreciate that I've gone quite fast there through that. So before I get to the case study, Shah, is there any questions in there? We can do some for a couple of minutes.
There are a couple questions. One of the ones that they were talking about is they would like you to explain the feature adoption rate a little bit more. It's a new term for some folks, and but it sounds like
Okay.
it's very valuable. So, how do
Yeah.
you use it, and how do you modify things once you see some adoption rates that need to be improved?
Yeah, sure. So a feature, for example, if I'm going to pick something that most people probably know, so like Microsoft Teams, for example, or Slack. So they continuously are having new features. One of the big ones that was during the pandemic was conference calling and the ability to be able to see, to show yourself in front of the screen when you're using Microsoft Teams, for example. That was a new feature that was brought out. But because people were still getting to grips with doing conference calling in general remotely, then that was a feature that perhaps was later adopted than before. So, in the back of Microsoft Teams, as I mentioned, all your data sources, there are dashboards. I can't show you one here because I don't have it, but if you're able to access it, any software you have, you'll see in there that there's what the different features are called for the tooling that you are using. And when you see the dashboard and you see the different features, so in that case, I can't remember what it was called, but say, for example, it was called conference calling pop out. You were able to say, okay, how many people are actually using that feature? Is it 500 people? Is it 1,000 people? Now, depending on how important that feature is, when you look at that in the dashboard, you'll be then able to say, well, based on the number of people that we want to use that feature, this is how many people are actually using the feature, and drill down a bit more into being able to say, okay, what more do we need to do? Is it that people need more training? Is it that they need more time? Do they need perhaps their leader to model the behavior for them to do it? So that's what a feature adoption rate basically is, if that's answered the question.
Yes, it does. The other thing that is very interesting is there's been a lot in the chat about the personas.
Yeah,
And also they're talking about, they says it's a great thing to do, but it takes a lot of time.
it does.
How
Yeah.
can you give us some tips on how to right balance that? We know it does take time, but there's a lot of value of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, what I have done is I have and again, it's choices, right? So we can't do everything we would like to do as change managers. But where before I would spend a lot of time, for example, on a stakeholder management plan, I would spend a lot of time, you know, analyzing all the stakeholders, who they are, and, the grid of high and low interest. I don't spend as much time doing that anymore, I admit. I spend more time saying, okay, which pockets of an organization is this technology meant to be for? Let's have the conversations with key representatives or stakeholders in those areas and having like a 30-minute interview with them just to get a sense of what's the organization like, what's the history, the people who are impacted, spending another 30 minutes with some of the impacted users, even bringing perhaps 5 of them onto a call if you can get them all onto a call at the same time. Sometimes it's challenging, but that helps. Just spending like even just 2 hours of questioning can give you lots of insights to be able to build the persona, as opposed to then having to spend time interviewing, I don't know, 100 people, or waiting until you've set up your Change Champions network to get them to tell you what the personas are like. So, yes, I spend less time on stakeholder management. I spend more time interviewing and building up the profiles. And then that's what helps to inform, again, where I think the change effort is most needed. But I appreciate it. It does take time.
We appreciate that. And we have just a couple minutes left, Selena. So I know
Yeah.
that there's more questions, and we will make sure that they're going to go over to the webinar exchange so we can continue the conversation.
Yeah.
So
That's fine. Okay, so just quickly, because I want to also keep a bit of time at the end, 2 case studies. I was just going to quickly rattle through. You can also look at this in the webinar exchange, but 2 organizations that have followed a human-centric approach and had lots of success. One is McDonald's. So in recent years, no surprise, McDonald's has gone through the roof, especially through pandemic. Their focus has been on improving their customer experience, operational efficiency and digital capabilities, self-service, mobile ordering. They even have a fully automated McDonald's store now that opened in Texas. In being able to do this, they have spent a lot of time and effort preparing their employees. They've introduced having a mobile app so that employees can be more connected and talk about change. They've had cross-functional teams building the learning and piloting the program. So again, it's not been an effort that's just been with the change team. They've really brought different SMEs together from different parts of the organization to make sure that the learning works. They've introduced gamification so that people can learn, and incentivization as well. So they have a learn and earn program, and they've also introduced 3D reality as well. So I appreciate McDonald's is a very different case, and not all organizations are able to do this. But I think what it shows with McDonald's, I mean, they had the impact was they had nearly 400,000 employees complete their training in 2022, and the net score for satisfaction was 97% amongst their workforce. And this is bearing in mind that McDonald's is mainly a franchisee organization, so really having to get through to a lot of external employees and people that you wouldn't necessarily have the control over. Another one is Procter and Gamble. So Procter and Gamble, huge organization, many famous brands all around the world that we all use in terms of consumer products. Their focus is innovation, customer experience, streamlined operations through value in outcomes. They're very big on digital transformation. Most of their products now have some technology element, from things like the toothbrushes that can send data back in to the offices and tell people how people are brushing their teeth. Having an AI skin advisor as well to tell you how your skin is, for example. So they're very, very big on technology. And what this has meant then in terms of their employees and driving through change, big focus on digital upskilling, as I mentioned. They really see data science and AI machine learning as key. So making sure that employees have the time to be able to upskill and go through the changes they need to do these roles. Having a digital culture, so they're very big on a growth mindset, experimentation, and trust. So they recognize that with all the data that they're using and what they've been asked of employees, that they have to have the trust as well. And they do that with the leadership team there. So yes, those were the 2 case studies. If you wanted to look more into that, of examples of where this is really working, and there are examples that we can all take. How are we doing for time, Michelle? Because again, I've gone quite fast through that.
I think what we need to do is, because we're almost at the hour, and I know we'll continue the conversation in the webinar exchange community. I did want to thank everyone for participating in the webinar today, and I would especially like to thank you, Selina, for the wonderful presentation. And again, by seeing the chat, there's a lot of interest in this topic. Immediately following the webinar, the feedback survey will pop up, and we ask everybody to please take a few minutes to complete the survey, as your feedback helps us to shape future webinars that are value add for you. And don't forget to join the Webinar Exchange community in ACMP Connect to continue the conversation and engage with our speaker and fellow participants. This recording will be available next week in the webinar section of the ACMP Resource Library located on the ACMP website at acmpglobal.org. If you already have your CCMP, remember that by attending webinars, you can earn PDUs towards maintaining your CCMP. So record your hours today from this webinar. Again, thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time.